Hello and welcome to today's Info2Go webinar. My name is Annie Gaines, and I'm the Continuing Education Consultant here at the Idaho Commission for Libraries, located in sunny and warm Boise, Idaho. Our webinars and other continuing education opportunities are funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Everyone is muted, and we encourage you to use the chat feature to ask questions and discuss with other attendees. As you exit the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete an evaluation. And as always, we appreciate your honest feedback. Today's topic is about poverty in Idaho, and our presenter today is Leslie Blanch from the University of Idaho, Bonneville County Extension. So take it away, Leslie.
Okay, thank you so much, Annie, and thank you, each of you, for coming today, your interest in this topic. And I'm in Bonneville County, as Annie said, so that's Idaho Falls area. And we actually have pretty sunny, warm weather. We're in the high 80s, low 90s these days, so I'm loving it. Okay, I'm gonna forward this slide. There we go. You already know who I am. So my official title is Family and Consumer Science Associate Educator. Basically, I do health and wellness classes in the community. And this topic, poverty, affects many aspects of wellness. We could think of financial wellness, that one may be pretty obvious, but also physical wellness, food resources, shelter, medical access, mental emotional wellness, dealing with the stress of poverty, the crisis of poverty, and social wellness as well. So many factors. So we'll just dive right in. Extension Poverty Competency Task Force is a committee of ours, started a couple years ago, and there are 12 of us educators that are certified poverty coaches statewide. Poverty coaches meaning just to increase awareness. And we received this training through Dr. Donna Beagle, which will be on the next slide. But essentially today we're going to be focusing, we'll start with a little self-reflection on poverty. We'll define poverty, and then what I think is really impactful, was really impactful for me when I initially went through a training, is addressing the myths and the stereotypes, and then reviewing some data in Idaho. We do want to, of course, in all of our sharing, keep in mind respect and a judgment-free zone here, confidentiality, safe to pass, meaning you don't have to participate via chat, but we would love for you to participate via chat, and we just want to maintain that learning environment. I am constantly learning, as we all are, so I'm learning right along with you. And here's the training that we U of I Extension educators attended. Dr. Donna Beagle, who was in generational poverty herself until about age 25, has started this, I want to say almost ministry, but organization called Communication Across Barriers. And she really emphasizes communicating with those who we may be trying to help or serve. So on the wall, what if we were in person, we would each have a sticky note, and I would ask you to write down or even draw words, images, phrases that come to mind when you hear the word poverty. So since we're online, we'll just have you enter that into chat. When you hear the word poverty, what words or phrases come to mind? And we'll give you a minute or so to enter that in. And I'm going to open up my chat box, and I know Annie's monitoring as well. I see words such as hard times, struggling, lack, scarcity, low income, hunger, another lack, stress, yes, homelessness. Someone pictures an emaciated child. Difficulty, adversity, looking through the couch cushions to find change to pay for gas. Systemic issues, fear, great reflections, and feel free to continue to enter. But were the majority of those debt, here's another one, negative ideas, words, phrases, or positive? Negative, yes. And with all of those words, yep, negative, negative, negative. Think of fear, adversity, homelessness, emaciation from hunger, struggle. Poverty is a crisis, and I think that's something that we need to keep in mind as we interact with folks in our community, whether it's on a professional level or personal level, or even a very casual level, that these folks are in a crisis. So where do our ideas from poverty come from? Here we go. Internet, television, social media, radio, the press. Are these ideas always accurate? Maybe, maybe not. The media is our number one resource where we get ideas about poverty, and our perspectives are very shaped by the media. Some have a lived experience of poverty, whether that's having grown up in poverty or maybe had a situational poverty after a death or divorce, job loss, etc. Some may have immigrational poverty. Some of you may yourselves or people you know come from another country, not being in a real good financial place and had to start over. So some of us, again, may have that lived experience. So that's more real, that's more personal. But also it's very real, it can be personal when we know someone having contact, especially close contact with someone who is living in poverty as well. We kind of get that inside story. So poverty myths and stereotypes. Here's one. Here's a myth. People living in poverty are lazy, stupid, and they just don't want to work. Basically, it's their fault. So when I mentioned that when I first went through this training, this was very eye-opening, and several of these myths I had been brought up to believe, or just not that my parents were cruel. They were very kind, compassionate people, but I think just in the generation, I was brought up in the 70s, early 80s, that these myths were even more embedded into our society. So that there's just laziness. People can work if they want to. They can pull themselves up by the bootstraps. Well, the facts really debunk that myth. Most people living in poverty are actually working more than one job. 1.7 jobs is what the statistics say. So does that correlate with being lazy? No. Very hardworking. Very hardworking, working more than one job, putting in all that time, effort, blood, sweat, and tears, and yet still not being able to make it. Working adults who live in the crisis of poverty, again, it is a crisis, spend more hours working on the average than their wealthier counterparts. People living in poverty are more likely to work jobs, not only longer hours, but that require that physical labor, increasing the likelihood of injury, long-term health issues, and maybe even eventually the need for disability. And I just think of even running your body that hard, working 60, 70 hours a week, that's going, even if it's not a physically demanding job, there's the mental and emotional stress, which also can lead, as we know, to many, many physical and mental illnesses. So those are facts that debunk that myth that the majority of people living in poverty are just lazy and don't want to work. Many are working and working hard. Here's another myth. Government assistance is adequate, that it actually encourages independence. Fact. Government assistance was only created to be a supplement. It wasn't created to be an individual or family's whole income. People cannot climb out of poverty by just relying on the funds or the support that the government offers. And current welfare policies unfortunately create barriers actually to those struggling to get out of poverty. Quite often, if you make, 1 penny more than X amount, oh, you lose the Medicaid benefit, or you lose your SNAP, your supplemental nutritional assistance program, basically what we would call food stamps when I was growing up. You lose that food money. And so I have known of people who are working and their boss is going to offer them a raise, and they actually say, please don't give me the raise because I would lose my medical through Medicaid, or I would lose my food, and the raise you're giving me wouldn't nearly make up for that. So what a dilemma. What a dilemma. Many people cling to welfare because they just don't see any other options. They don't see that with their current skill or education level that they have any hope. And hopelessness, I would say, is another word we could add to something I think of when I think of poverty. There's a lot of hopelessness felt there. Here's another myth. Social mobility is easily achievable. You can climb up that ladder. You can start in a quote lower position and just climb on up. And for some people, that is true. We hear a lot of success stories. I don't know about a lot, but over the generations, we have heard numerous wonderful success stories. But that is more the exception than the rule. Think of your own social circle and what your friends, families, neighbors, what resources they have, and how that might benefit you. So for a while, I worked at a health club teaching in the water classes. And when my children were old enough, my son got a job being a lifeguard and swim coach. And my daughter got a job at the front desk. Were they qualified? Yes. But I think it probably helped that they knew someone, happened to be me, to give them a recommendation. And just think to yourself, how many times have you either had access maybe to at least apply for a job or an interview or some other kind of resource, whether it's a loan, because of who you know. And that's not necessarily a negative thing. But middle class and upper class tend to know, in general, middle and upper class people who have these resources. And we can help each other with that upward mobility more easily than someone who everyone they know is just like they are, not making ends meet. Maybe a combination of government assistant and working, or working 1+ jobs, and don't have any money to spare, don't know anyone who can help them climb the ladder. So in our society, who you know does help, and again, that's not necessarily a negative thing, but who people in poverty know typically are other people in poverty. So that opportunity just isn't as available to them. So poverty is isolating. Again, and that goes back to those in poverty tend to know others in poverty, certain neighborhoods, and then all those children, maybe who are in the quote low income neighborhood, they're going to school together. They're not mixed necessarily with children from other socioeconomic classes. And again, just the neighbors, they're all in the same boat, struggling. And that was one of the words we saw with poverty, struggling. Their hard work and wage increase don't always go together, unfortunately. And here are some statistics. In unskilled, uneducated jobs, and I just want to qualify, that doesn't mean they're unimportant. All jobs are important. But what we would deem, or the Department of Labor would deem as an unskilled job or not requiring a certain education, after 10 years, the average pay increase is only $2 an hour. After 10 years. And then looking at a longer time frame, after 25 years, okay, 2.25. So Dr. Donna Beagle shares in one of her videos that when she was in generational poverty, and she grew up in a family that did agricultural, she calls it cherry picking, is what they did. They picked fruit. When she was 15, she got a job in a factory, some kind of factory. And they said, well, we can't give you a raise until you're 18, but you work hard for us and we can give you a raise. When she was 18, she went to them and they said, you shouldn't have been working for us underage, you're fired. So that promise did not hold true. And we've heard of various companies where they might pay under the table. Some companies, unfortunately, will hire day help or will hire somebody for a couple weeks or a month. And then at the end, it's just when they come for their pay, you didn't work for me, get out of here. Well, what is that person going to do? They can't afford to go to the law or get an attorney. So unfortunately, they can be easily taken advantage of when they're in that crisis of poverty. So what is the federal poverty level? For a family of 4, it's $26.79 a month. Now that's across the board, not just Idaho, but that could be Southern California, that could be New York City, that could be Alabama, could be Chicago, somewhere in the Midwest. And we all know that the economic strain is different depending what state you live in and what city or area you live in. So that is not taken into account cost of living state to state or town by town. This is across the board in the US, basically about $32,000 a year. So just think of your own situation. You can probably do a pretty quick calculation if you have any kind of house payment or rent, then maybe add on top of that a car payment. If you're paying for any kind of medical insurance, even if it's, your employer pays part, you pay part, even with some of those benefits, even if you didn't have a house payment and owned your car, family of 4 could be quite a challenge living on just over $32,000 a year. But that's what the federal government says you should be able to make it. Now, if you're under 32,150, then you qualify for various assistance. ALICE is a term I had not been familiar with up until a couple of years ago, so this may be new to some of you as well. Asset limited, income constrained, employed. So this might go back to that person working more than one job or even one job. We shouldn't expect people to have to work 1.7 jobs to make ends meet or even still not make ends meet. So these people in the ALICE category, they're employed, they're working, but they typically don't own a home, or they're not making house payments, they're renting. They may not own a vehicle. They're income constrained. They're not making it or barely squeaking by each month. But if some emergency comes up, that they are not able to scrounge anything to cover that. So they're employed, but not making it. Asset limited, income constrained. The calculations just aren't working. They're working, but the money just doesn't seem to be sufficient. And I think as economic times ebb and flow, there are more and more folks falling into that category. So federal poverty level, again, we just reviewed that, and this is across the board, no matter what state or area of the state you live in. If you make $26.79 a month, that should be sufficient. What is the current cost of a rent for, say, a 2-bedroom apartment in Boise? Anybody know? Or any other area in Idaho? I'm going to be opening chat here. Anybody know what that might look like? Want to thank you, Chris. Put in 45% of eastern Idaho falls fall into the ALICE category, that they're working, but they're asset limited. 45%, that's almost half in eastern Idaho. Idaho essential workers, working poor, might be another name for the ALICE demographic. And this is in this chat entry. These families are having to make critical choices each month. Yes. Do they pay their rent or their utilities? Do they repair their car or pay that medical bill? Can they afford to work if they have to pay for childcare? And Annie put in the chat a resource about Alice, so check that out as well. Okay, we've got some numbers here. 1,600 plus for a 2-bedroom apartment, 1,200 in Pocatello. That's almost half of our 2,679. 2,000 plus. Someone else between 1,500 and 2,000, 1,800, says Annie. So that does not leave much for food for a family of 4, let alone gas, car insurance, maybe medical insurance or medical costs, prescriptions, birthday parties, clothes. You get the idea. Childcare. Speaking of childcare, click on this little balloon. Folks can get some assistance with childcare if they make under 33,566 a year. So still pretty low, but a little bit, they can make a little bit more than the federal poverty level and qualify for childcare. That's helpful, but what if you make 33,567 or 34,000? Still pretty income constrained, but no help with childcare. And SNAP, I referred to earlier, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, food money. Thankfully, that is more liberalized than the federal poverty level. So that does give people who fall in between the 32,000, maybe even they're under the 32,000, so they're getting some, but those who fall above that 32, I'm just going to say 33,000, and between this 44,500, I get tongue-tied with all the numbers, but you can see them there. Thankfully, those people who fall in between can at least get some help with childcare, maybe, and SNAP, the food assistance. So they can't make over the 40,560, but if it's under that, they can get that food money. And my understanding from a friend of mine in Alaska, so for a single person, she gets almost 400 a month. Food in Alaska is more expensive, of course, because of all the transportation to get it there. WIC, Women, Infant, and Children program, again, thankfully is quite a bit more liberalized, so you can make up to almost 58,000 and still qualify. That is for a pregnant woman. There'll be food vouchers along with education, nutrition education. That's for infants and children up to the age of 5. And that has been very, very valuable for a lot of people. So that is generally administered through our public health departments. So thankfully, those who fall or who are above the federal poverty level may not qualify for, quote, welfare, can hopefully get some of these other assistance. Now, United Way says that, in reality, a survival budget, they're saying, and, they may be averaging the very expensive places to live in the US and so forth, but they're saying really you need, for a family of 4, 78,000 to survive. Some of you might be thinking, wow, I don't have a survival budget. Again, depending what state and city and so forth, that might seem excessive, or it might be just barely surviving. Other survival budget statistics, EPI, and I apologize, I can't remember what organization that is. They go higher, and MIT goes even higher. So you might be thinking, well, those are unrealistically high survival budgets. Again, they may be considering the very high end, very expensive areas in our country. I think of New York City. We think of extreme wealth, but then there's also extreme poverty right in that same city. San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, all those big places. So I'm just going to open up chat, see if there are any comments. Feel free to comment along the way. Does anyone have any comments about these numbers? Comments, reactions, maybe more insight, more references? Jenny comments, MIT budget removes stress from the individual, that's for sure. Yep. How often are these numbers updated? I knew there actually is a new 2025 United Way. I don't believe they're updated every year. I want to say every 3 to 5 years, but don't quote me on that. So the new survival budget actually for United Way is even higher than this. I was not able to access that and update the slide prior to the presentation, but I don't believe it's every year. I would say every 3 to 5. But you can see from what might be realistic, let's even look at United Way here, about 78,000 to what the government says we should be able to live on that family of four. Quite a discrepancy there. So poverty in Idaho, and I'm assuming most of you are from Idaho. I know sometimes on these Info2Go presentations, we have guests from other states. These statistics from Idaho, 11% of the whole state are below the federal poverty level, are living below that 32 some odd $1,000 per year. Now 2022, 43% of Idahoans were below the ALICE threshold, and thank you, Christina, I believe it was, who gave us an update. At least in eastern Idaho, it was 45% of us are below the ALICE threshold. MIT would like to see us all earning a wage for a single adult just to support themselves. MIT says we need to be earning $23.18 an hour. What about a single adult living with 2 children? That single adult, according to MIT, would need to make $47.93 an hour. Child care. The average child care cost is 22% of a person's income. That's average. So those who make a higher income, obviously it's going to be a lower percentage of their income. But what about those who are probably just not even making the 32,000? It could well be above 22% of their income. So quite often, a person's income just pays for the child care. So why work? And yet so many of us can condemn, for lack of a better word, or judge and say, "Ah, that person's lazy. They need to put their kids in childcare and be out there working." Well, what would you do if all your earned money went to just pay for the childcare and then you weren't even able to be with your child? So lots and lots of food for thought here. I know someone who lives in Washington State talking to her mother, and this mother said, yes, so-and-so who has a professional, somewhat medical related job, that if she even went back to work part-time with 2 preschoolers, all her part-time income would go to pay for that part-time childcare. So real decisions. But I thought this was very interesting. In reality, the average child care takes about 22% of someone's income, but the federal benchmark that says, oh, you should be able to afford child care, it should only take 7% of your income. This formula, and again, this is a percentage, but this formula hasn't changed since the 1960s. So 7% is quite a bit behind reality in our current day of 2025. Some more statistics, and this is from about a year ago. The average food assistance program gives you $1.96 per meal. That might cover breakfast. What do you think about covering a lunch or a dinner meal? Is that realistic in your estimation? Thank you, Chris, for your further insight. AL's data is available each year. Thank you. I was not aware of that. Annie, I know of someone who resigned her library job due to the cost of childcare being more than what she earned a year. And everybody seems to agree that $1.96 per meal is not sufficient. And so many of those folks receiving the food assistance do have children, well over half, 67%. And then 38% include elderly or maybe disabled. So people who literally are not able to work for various legitimate reasons there, what we might call legitimate. And again, 43%, these people who are receiving the food assistance program, they're Alice, they're working, but they still cannot make it. Julie says, I don't think you can even make homemade food for $1.96 per meal. So something that one of my colleagues pointed out is that in the grocery store, we need to be in that judgment-free zone. She said that she has observed in the grocery store when people are using their EBT, their SNAP benefit card, and they've got their cart filled with what we might call junk food, highly processed, sugary foods, etc. And they think, oh, boy, they're really wasting taxpayer money. I'm paying for them to buy junk food. Condemn, condemn. And then she has also seen someone paying with an EBT card who has pretty healthy choices, quite a bit of produce, etc., and someone in line saying, boy, I wish I could afford that fresh food. They're getting it for free. So they're condemned if they do or they don't. And I thought, I hate to admit it, but I think I have had those thoughts too, especially because my background is as a dietitian, of this person's buying all kinds of sugar and processed foods. They need to be buying healthy foods. But the other perspective is what fills them up? What are their kids guaranteed to eat? And what are they used to? We like what we like. So I've had to really step back myself and try to enter that judgment-free zone. And that is one reason that I'm so passionate about nutrition education, and especially to SNAP recipients, is to try to give them more tools to work with for budgeting with meal planning, trying to incorporate nutritious foods where they can while still having some treats and so forth. So just some pretty startling statistics, more numbers. I know we're kind of overloaded on numbers. This won't last too much longer, but here we go. Maximum cash assistance for a single parent family of just $309 a month. That's not going to make anybody rich on welfare. Some states, and I believe Idaho is included, with the birth of the first child, you get a $60 increase in that 309. So $369. Second child, another 60. So whatever that is, 400 and some odd, 430-ish. But third, fourth child, no increase. There's that myth that people are getting rich off of having, quote, welfare babies. Having more children on welfare, they get more money. They're not getting a whole nother $309 per person. They're getting maybe $60 per child. Some states don't give any addition per child. It's $309. There you go. And others only give additional $60 per child, just up to this two additional children. Now, here in March, and this may have changed already since March because we had some updates from you folks in chat about the average rent cost in Idaho. And this does not specify whether that's a 1 or 2 bedroom, but I believe that was a 1 bedroom. I know here in Idaho Falls, they're building townhomes and apartments like crazy. I drove by one, brand new townhomes, and they said rent as low as $199 per month. And I thought, $2,000 a month. I don't know if it's 2 or 3 bedroom townhome, but obviously, not a yard and so forth. Don't know if they had a garage. $2,000 a month, that does not match the average wages here in Idaho Falls. The average disability monthly payment is barely over the average cost of an apartment. So if, let's say, somebody was paying $13.37 a month for an apartment and they're on disability, so there's some limitations. There's some reasons why they aren't or cannot work. And they're only getting $15.80 a month. Hopefully they're getting the SNAP benefits, but still that leaves, what, $250-ish to pay all utilities, gas if they even have a car, or money for other transportation, incidentals, personal care, household products, because the food assistance benefits, although you can use them at a grocery store that also sells toilet paper and laundry soap, you can't purchase those things with the SNAP benefit. So sometimes we think, well, they've got food assistance, they can make it. No. Remember the toilet paper crisis of COVID? I have a friend who is receiving SNAP, and sometimes she runs out of toilet paper and laundry detergent and things like that. So I think we as individuals need to be cognizant of that and how can we help in a practical way and not just assume, hey, they're getting assistance, they've got all they need. Think about all the little things that we need to keep our bodies clean and healthy and so forth, and those of our family, and these individuals need those as well.
We have a question in
Okay.
chat about the max cash assistance for food of $309. The question is that 309 contingent on what a person makes?
I don't think so, but let me jot down this question. So is it 309 max? Okay, it is max, but is it based on what you make?
Yeah.
So like a sliding scale? Is it a
Mm-hmm.
sliding scale with a max up to 309?
Mm-hmm.
I can check into that. And Annie, if I email you the answer, you could forward that to the group? Is that correct?
Definitely.
Great. Very good question. And I even have that somewhere in my notes. I can look back, but I don't recall at this moment. Susan says we have a local nonprofit that partners with the food bank to provide home goods pantry like diapers, laundry, detergent, toilet paper. And our food bank in Idaho Falls does that as well, which is wonderful. And I didn't realize that though until I started doing some work with them. And I thought that's wonderful because those things are essential as well. So there's been a lot of numbers thrown around. This has not been a presentation necessarily on, okay, what can we do about this? This is more of an awareness, increasing our awareness, increasing our compassion so that we can act as individuals to help those in need. Maybe we can act on a political level for policy. What can our organizations do? And just that awareness as, for instance, if you're library workers and there may be people taking shelter, daytime shelter in your library who are living without a home, living in their car, etc. And what can we do as organizations and individuals to help relieve some of their stress in a practical way? But I think also realizing that they are living in the crisis of poverty, and that can increase our patience with them, our compassion, and as Donna Beagle would encourage, to have communication across barriers, breaking down those barriers. So, what would be maybe a new insight or a take home message that you have gotten from today's discussion? And again, you can just enter into chat. Worried about the next few years, thinking about how many of us, maybe some of us on this call or people we know, are right on that border. They're making it okay now, but a layoff, an illness, a divorce, death in the family, so many things can tip us, any of us really, into that poverty category. And yes, we need to be more compassionate and non-judgmental. And Rochelle, that was my take home when I first took this poverty training. It was like a 2-day training, but I was really ashamed of myself because I thought of myself as a pretty compassionate person. Always had kind of this compassion with the poor. I'd worked with food pantries since I was a teenager, things like that. But I didn't realize some of the preconceived notions, some of the myths that I had kind of subconsciously really bought into. And so it was a real game changer, just changing my outlook toward individuals. Some other empathy, yes. Susan says, I was surprised that 45% of Eastern Idaho, where I live, yeah, me too, is on the Alice scale. Mm-hmm. I think that will change the way I view patrons in the library or people at school. Right. It starts with us, right? Kind of starts with our heart and our thoughts, which will lead to our words and actions, hopefully being more positive. Federal guidelines on poverty don't keep up with inflation. Amen to that. And yet people use those guidelines to spread misinformation. Yes, misinformation, and I think fueling the judgment and fueling the condemnation and lack of compassion. I learned about some of the myths and stereotypes that I knew about but didn't actively believe. Okay, so this person didn't believe them, but she knew they were there. Now I have the knowledge and information to inform others. Great. Sharing what we've learned. Seeing numbers for the first time and processing it, and I know there are a lot of numbers. Being aware of non-government resource in your area because government assistance isn't sufficient. Yes, be aware. And how can you as an individual or organization, can your business or church group or civic group do a drive to collect toilet paper and take it to those food banks or other distribution centers? I know our Salvation Army and Community Action Partnership, and there are lots of avenues here in our area, and I'm sure in your area as well, to distribute those non-food necessities as well. Elaine, I'm worried about how people will be affected by the changes to these programs made recently. Me too. Me too. And, this is not a political discussion. This is not a party discussion. This is just a discussion of people, people, and keeping the people in mind who are living in the crisis of poverty, whatever the cause. But I think, I was saying to my husband, we need to really be prepared to be more helpful in a practical way because people are suffering. People who used to have high paying jobs in the government now are unemployed, etc. In addition to those who maybe have been struggling for all or most of their lives. So, some of this information can be discouraging, but I would encourage you to flip it around. How can you encourage someone in poverty? How can you treat them as an equal? How can you practically assist them, whether that's personally or professionally or through an organization? And then, as someone mentioned, sharing what you learned today, just to increase that perspective as well. Any other questions or comments? Because I would be more than happy to look up information I don't know and get back to you through Annie. So feel free to enter some more questions if possible, or additional feedback before we wrap things up for today. Is there data about helping people out of poverty? As a librarian, I support increased literacy in the community, obviously, but is there any study about what avenues help family and individuals? I'm writing that down. So, data about actually helping people out. I'm sure there is. And our team in Extension of Idaho, there are several people who are much more involved in the research than I am, so I can kind of pick their brain and get some research sources from them as well. So studies of what help people out. Okay, I will put that on my to-do list. Just in transparency, if you know anything about Extension, we have 4-H county fairs, and this is our fair season. So this next week or two are going to be pretty busy, but I will try to get back to you as sooner, if not later, than 2 weeks on these. Elaine, we are not immune from the cycles of poverty ourselves. So true. What are specific ways we can be supportive of those who are experiencing poverty? Let's open that up to the group. What are specific ways we can be supportive to those who are experiencing poverty?
I have some ideas that I've seen from other libraries. Like, for example, I've seen libraries offering a collection of like interview clothing. So, like nice shirts, suit jackets, ties,
Hmm?
things like that that can be borrowed from the library.
Oh,
Um, Libraries can do a great job of, resume support, helping
great,
folks, create a resume and apply for jobs on the public computers.
nice. Would a public library be able to do something like a collection box where they're doing a toilet paper drive, so to speak, or laundry detergent drive, or shampoo and soap drive, and then that those things could be distributed to those in need? Is that practical in a library setting?
Most likely.
Okay,
And Marina says the Caldwell Public Library has a donation
okay,
cabinet in one of their public areas where they collect food and diapers and clothes with like a take what you need, leave what you
okay.
can type thing.
Nice, nice. And I see some others coming in as well. Hosting food and supply drives. Jennifer Nelson says one of the branches in her library system has a food pantry, currently collecting school supplies. Great. Personal hygiene supplies available for patrons. Is that on a regular basis, Madison? And how do they go about accessing those personal hygiene supplies that are available? Meanwhile, Jenny says we've collected coats, suitcases for foster kids. So it sounds like you all have some great ideas and have already implemented some things. And just something I want to, thank you, Madison. We currently have an unlocked cabinet that is take what you need. And those are the personal hygiene supplies. There are in multiple branches set up differently for ease of patron use. Great, great, great. Here's a question. How do we teach kids in poverty that they can grow beyond where they are? That is a loaded question. That is a loaded question. We'll come back to that. Annie says, internally, I've been part of libraries that collect donations during holiday season to donate to a specific organization, such as a women's shelter, feminine hygiene products in bathroom stalls, and period packs that can be taken. Very practical. Yeah, think of that. If you don't have money for food, are you going to have money for personal hygiene and feminine supplies? New Mexico has period pods. My math teacher sister sees teens give and revert to give up and revert to what they know. So going back to how do we teach kids in poverty that they can grow beyond where they are? What let's take that to the group. Again, I'm not an expert in all these things, but I know that all of our hearts on this call would love to help kids up and out of that what might be called generational poverty. True, poverty does not necessarily equal unhappiness, especially for children. That is true. And that's something that Dr. Donna Beagle pointed out, that on a plane trip or something, something came up about one of her books, and the person said, oh, those poor children, they're without this, without that. They don't have love. They don't have happiness. And Donna said, wait a minute, they are without some practical things. But she said, I had a lot of love growing up, and she was in generational poverty. She said, being poor doesn't, or in poverty doesn't equal being unloved. and doesn't necessarily equal being unhappy. There's going to be the stress on the adults, and there's going to be different stressors on the children. But that is a good point. That those children can still be happy. But any ideas of how we as a society, individuals in the library system can, I'm kind of trying to go back to that question about helping the children out. And looks like we've got some education, Elaine says, is often the great equalizer. But unfortunately, higher education is becoming more and more divisive and out of reach. So making education and higher education more accessible to all. Sorry, my scrolling is not the smoothest here. Literacy programs in the library and activities give children hope. Great, so bringing it back to the libraries, how in the libraries we can give hope, and there's extra learning. The more information they desire, the more education can be encouraged. I don't know why I keep going back up to the top. I apologize. One last scan. I don't want to miss any of the chat. So literacy clubs and programs that help kids interact with people in other socioeconomic groups, help kids see a broader perspective in both directions. Yes, the children who have can hopefully gain more compassion for those who are struggling with poverty, and those struggling with poverty can interact and build those social connections to help them climb out of poverty. Jenny says, very practically, teaching how to fill out scholarship applications, internship applications, helping them with those things. Annie put some resources in there in relation to consumer finance. So thank you as a group and participants for sharing with all of us, and I'm learning from you as well, some of these resources. And I think just stimulating the thoughts, getting us out of the judgment zone is a great starting place, and then putting boots on the ground, which so many of you are already doing, but getting really creative with that, thinking outside the box. With University of Idaho Extension, our 4-H program is one of our largest programs, and we try to be very cognizant about that, offering scholarships and other things to children and families who may not be able to afford the fees. Even if they seem minimal, they're not minimal when you don't have money for food and other necessities. So getting kids involved in low cost or no cost extracurricular activities, I think, is very helpful in building that generation, bringing them up out of poverty. Thank you, everyone, and I will get back to you through Annie with these questions, hopefully in less than 2 weeks. That's my goal. So thank you so much for coming, for your time and attention today.
Yes, thank you everybody for coming, and thank you, Leslie, for this wonderful presentation. This was a great discussion, great information, and I loved all the sharing and discussion in the chat. This was great.
Me too. Yes, thank you for that interaction. I appreciate it.